Well, hello and welcome to this first of my podcasts, ladies, gents, boys and girls. Thanks for joining us. I hope you find some of the stuff that we cover interesting and would love to hear back from you in the comments. As you know, that the Paranormal Panorama is a new venture with quite a few presenters on there sharing their podcasts with you. Every single month there's something new, and of course we can update you in our blogs and keep anything that sort of springs to light we'll share with you. A little bit about me, if some of you do know me from old, ladies, gents. I've been around the subject for the best part of 30 years publicly and 50 years as a researcher come enthusiast. Where did it all start? Well, it's a very typical answer to that question is from a personal sighting that I had many years ago. We can go back to 1980, in the October of 1980 that year. Quite a prolific time in British ufology as well. Something, by the way, that I wasn't aware of until my own particular sighting spiked the interest, started digging deep, and then all of a sudden, in that particular 3 months after my sighting, things started happening. We had Alan Godfrey's famous case in Todmorden, the local policeman who came across a downed flying saucer, as he described it, parked up on the roadside. Then, of course, at Christmas of that year, 1980, was the famous Rendlesham Forest incident. 2 cases there that we will cover off in future shows, if you like. But going back to 1980 and going back to October time, I was 21 years old. And I worked on the local buses. I was a bus conductor. You remember those? The guys who gave the tickets out and rung the bells? Well, that's what I did. And we used to work out of a little town in West Yorkshire called Hebendwyke. Some people might know it, you might not. But the West Riding of Yorkshire, the heavy woolen district is what we traded under. And our route took us between Dewsbury and Bradford. And this was a Sunday afternoon. We'd left Bradford Interchange somewhere in the region of about 4:30, I think it was, and we'd like a 15-minute journey to Oxall Top, which is something else I'll bring up with you a little later on, because Oxall Top does feature very heavily in my life now and has done for the last 15 years. But we had a timing point at Oxall Top, so you couldn't leave that particular point until 16:45 to give it the 24-hour clock, and we'd arrived a little bit early. So October time, it was starting to get dark. Not dark, but the sun had gone down, so it was twilight sort of time. And in those days, got off the platform and stood on the wall looking out towards East Bailey and over to the edge of the Pennines, the Lancashire Pennines. And something caught my eye, very high up in the sky. I looked at it and said to my mate who was at the side of me, my driver, look at this message. He said, what the heck's that, sort of thing. Staring at it, and you know, when you think back, this thing lasted just a few seconds. But I can honestly say I was looking at a silver reflective disc that appeared to be spinning extremely fast. And it would have been somewhere up in the maybe 2,000-3,000 feet. You could get an idea of the height because we have Emily Moore transmitter mast, which is just over 1,000 feet high, over on the same sort of skyline as I was looking, although I was looking a little bit more to the left of Emily Moore. But it would have been about 3 times the height of the transmitter. And just as we were looking at it, within the blink of an eye, it didn't vanish, but it shot upwards and gone. And that stuck with me, for the last 40 odd years now. People might think I'm critical of a lot of cases. I don't call it criticism. I think if you're going to research things, you've got to look at every possibility. And there are possibilities probably that some of these things that are reported are not from this planet. Now that's a hard thing to say for somebody who's debunked 99% of the cases, if you like, or debunk's a bad word. Put a solution, I'd like to say, put a solution to a lot of those cases. And anyway, as we say, the sighting I had convinced me that what I was looking at was not an aeroplane, was not a helicopter, wasn't a balloon. It was something unusual, and to this day, I've never been able to explain it away. As you can see from my bio, I make a bit of a claim where I can honestly say that I was paid to research UFOs. Well, this is basically true because those of you old enough to remember, going back into the 1990s, the person who became my father-in-law was Graham Birdsall. Now, Graham and his brother Mark, along with Tony Dodds at the time, had the idea that the country could do with a newsstand magazine on the UFO subject. And UFO magazine was launched. It was a bi-monthly thing. It was subscription only in the first instance, but then all of a sudden the interest in the subject was G'd up by many great movies and TV series and what have you, and it came to the point where it was worth the investment into publishing a magazine on the newsstands, and UFO magazine in the UK became the most popular UFO title in the country, and it held that position for quite some years. I'd met Graham in the mid-90s at one of his conferences that he was arranging before the big international conferences that Graham used to put on. He used to do things locally in Leeds under the Quest banner. And technology was coming along in the day, and Graham was wanting somebody who could look after maybe the audio side of things or even the video side of things. And at the time, I was starting a bit of a semi-pro career as a TV cameraman. I was busy working in sport for the likes of Calendar News, Look North, a little bit of the fledgling Sky stations, B-Sky B, and covering sports like football and rugby league. I'd always loved to play about with TV. I got my editing skills put together through the sports side of the subject that I was doing. And we decided that probably some of these lectures that Graham had been presenting and speakers he'd been presenting at his monthly or bi-monthly meetings of Quest would be good to put onto video, and that's what we started doing. Many of the big researchers over the years that come through Leeds, as we got into the UFO magazine being a newsstand title, then the conferences could become bigger and better as the readership and the audience grew. And we put some fantastic shows on in places like Solihull. We've been down at the University of London, the University of Westminster with shows, but the big ones used to be the 2-3 day events in Leeds, which was the Leeds University Lecture Theatre, which used to pack out with 600-700 people, and some fantastic speakers on the subject. So that's where I got involved with the magazine. On the back of that, then my interest in video started looking at a lot of the videotapes we were sent. We could see, in the first instance, a lot of this stuff was just mistaken identities, not using the cameras right, not really understanding how photography and video work, how irises and lenses and manual controls and automatic controls can totally screw up. And don't forget, most of these things are shot in very low light conditions. And back in the early 90s into the early noughties, the low light capability of cameras wasn't that good, to say the least. High definition didn't really come into the home market until the 2010s, so the resolution of the cameras wasn't nothing like what we were using to film for broadcast quality. And the cost was prohibitive for a lot of people, where you could buy a camcorder for £300-400 to look at something to start doing commercial work with. You're looking at 10 times that. And fortunately, my rugby work had let me build my kit up to that sort of standard, and still have it today. On the back of that, I was writing reports, I was writing articles for the magazine, and got involved with phenomena, which was something that was being developed by an Australian company to be a great big display out in Perth in Western Australia. And they came to UFO magazine for really the background of the subject, for articles writing up, for wall displays writing up, filmed interviews with people, and we did that for a year through UFO magazine, and the thing was quite successful for its 3-month run that it had down in Western Australia. Graham went out there on the launch, but sadly, not too long after that, we lost Graham very suddenly, and that left a great big hole in the magazine. Graham's wife didn't really want to carry on with the magazine, but I sort of said, look, leave it with me, I'll edit it. As long as the publications are going out there, as long as we're doing the numbers and it's not losing money, then we can carry on, I'm sure. Which we did for several months. But Christine in the end decided that she wanted to call it a day with the magazine, and wrapped it up. So on the back of that, then I felt that we'd got an audience out there who'd been very loyal to UFO magazine over the years, made great friends with many, many people, and that there was a market for something in the magazine industry, which is where UFO Data magazine was born. Initially, we had to go back to the old-fashioned way of self-printing, self-binding, self-publishing, which worked well for about 3-4 months. We got the membership up as a subscription only, where we got to the point where we could afford to have the magazine professionally printed, which we did, and that ran for a couple of years. Unfortunately, or fortunately, whichever way you want to look at it, during that time from sort of 2007, 8, 9, 10, the internet was growing at an immense pace. People's ability to get high-speed internet at home had become the norm, if you like, even though it was maybe 500 meg, half a meg to what we used to, we're getting 10, 20 times that now. But never mind, it meant that videos could be shown online, people could watch films online, and of course, like many of the other specific or specialist readable titles, they've gone. I mean, most of them now, they don't even publish, they just do a PDF version of the thing, so you can just download it to your computer or your tablet or your phone and read it on the go. And that's the way the magazine industry's gone, I'm afraid. The actual physical piece of paper in your hand, which is a beautiful feeling, it's always nice to turn the page and see things, that's just about dead on its feet now. So that's where I ended up. Obviously I had to keep working as well with a full-time job. I've just recently taken early retirement from 20 odd years with Royal Mail and devoting a little bit more time to this subject again. So it's a little bit about me. If you'd like to ask anything else, do pop the questions on the blog. I'll get back to everybody in the fullness of time the best way I can. So just to recap a little bit on the late great Graham Birdsall, much has been said about Graham over the years and his brother and the early colleagues within UFO publications. But Graham was one of these people who was absolutely devoted to getting the word out there, to making it as good as it could be, to give people a quality product. And UFO magazine was just that. It stood up there on the news shelves in W.H. Smith's or at the railway station. You could pick it up, and it was a glossy magazine. It wasn't a rubbishy print. It was well presented, it was well written, it was well edited, well illustrated, and it caught the eye of many, many people. People from across the world would share stories with UFO magazine. The readership, in this country was great on the newsstands, but the actual subscription to the people abroad, it went to 30 odd different countries regularly. The United States being one of them. They had their own version called UFO magazine, and it caused a few problems over the years with a bit of argument and what have you from the publishers of that title. But in comparison, there wasn't any. Without being rude, UFO magazine in the States was a little bit trashy. It was a little bit National Enquirer. It wasn't very, very good. It was full of the stranger things within the subject, and everybody with a voice got a chance to pitch their own thing. You could have flat earthers at the side of Transfiguration people. It was one of those things. Nexus magazine, which was a subscription-only magazine in this country, was another, a good title that looked a little bit more to the paranormal side of things, but it did cover some quite interesting UFO stories. There was also the Fortean Times, of course, which was established actually a little while before UFO magazine, but Fortean Times looked at everything Fortean, which was, people seeing pixies in the garden, people seeing the Virgin Mary in the supermarket, etc., all those kind of stories. But UFO magazine concentrated basically on the subject, on the research that had been done, and we got to interview some rather special people that probably, if you ask nowadays, don't really want to talk about the UFO subject. I remember meeting up with Seth Shostak at the National Space Centre. Yes, we've got a National Space Centre here in the UK, down in Leicester, based around the university. It's a wonderful, wonderful day out if you want to go. Some great exhibitions in there, some genuine hardware. We've got space capsules, we've got satellites, we've got remnants of the British space race, which was the original, the Blue Streak rockets from the 50s and the early 60s from Woomera. Very well presented, and really is worth a good day out. And the particular time that Seth Shostak was doing a presentation at the Space Centre, and we were invited to come down and speak to Seth. And he knew he was talking to UFO magazine. He knew what we were about, and he was quite open and quite forthcoming with his thoughts. Even the great late Sir Patrick Moore, I had the pleasure in buying him a cup of coffee, bless him. He was getting on a little bit when I saw him, and he was pretty infirm. Just to give a bit of anecdotal evidence here, we were sat in the restaurant, and he was sat at a table all on his own in a wheelchair, which wasn't the thing that you think about Sir Patrick. And he looked a little bit tired, and he looked very quiet, and I went over, introduced myself to him, shook him by the hand and said, "Can I get you a coffee, Patrick?" Oh, he said, "That'd be marvellous, thank you." And he sat, and we had a little chat and what have you, and talked about all things astronomical. And I thought, well, this guy's presenting to us. It was the crew of STS 101, I believe it was, who were on a educational tour, and they were giving a presentation in the lecture theatre at the Space Centre. And I thought, well, this is going to be interesting. Graham and I were sat down there in the front row, and Sir Patrick came in. He was aided to the podium, and all of a sudden it was like somebody switched a light on, and boom, there he was, Sir Patrick. And very good afternoon, everyone. I have a really great pleasure in introducing you to this crew of special people from STS 101. And he was away, and he was the Sir Patrick that you saw on the sky at night, and he was the eccentric older gentleman. And at the end of the thing, he said, "Thank you, good afternoon," and then sat back down in his wheelchair and almost went to sleep. It was just a wonderful, wonderful experience. But that's the sort of places that UFO magazine got through the door. And it was in no smaller effort down to Graham Birdsall. When Steven Spielberg launched Taken, remember the 8-part series? It's quite a good UFO story. It doesn't get played as much as it should, but it was one of these things. It was a big budget production. It was about 3 families who had been touched by the UFO subject over many years, and it was very, very good, to say the least. Well, when it first launched out in Hong Kong, and lo and behold, Spielberg's company actually approached Graham. Would he be willing to be at the launch and present the show and tell people about it. And sure enough, Graham went out there. Graham Birdsall, editor of UFO magazine in the UK, they had their own version out in the States. They didn't go there. They came to us in the UK, and Graham presented Taken to the world in the Far East. Something very proud of, and I've got one or two mementos from that trip that I keep close by my chest. Some nice little badges and what have you, and giveaways that they gave for the programme. One of the other things, Men in Black, the movie, number 2, not the first one, the second one. We got a phone call from some secretary in the States, and you're thinking, oh, this is rubbish, this. Who's telling me this? Who's calling me? Is it a prank call? But no, it was from the film company. And they'd said, look, we're working on Men in Black 2, and we wonder if you could supply us with some props. We'd like video titles, we'd like magazines, posters, anything like that you've got. Could you send us? So yeah, Graham, being a Yorkshireman, said, well, absolutely, yes. He says, what's it worth? And the lady on the other end said, listen, Rolex will pay us $3 million to have a Rolex watch on the Men in Black. Unfortunately, we don't pay you, but you'll get some good exposure for it and you'll get a credit at the end. So Graham said, well, can I book it to your FedEx account? And oh, of course, yes, you can book it to the FedEx account. We'll pay for the transit. And sure enough, if you look on the film, when they're in the flat above the store with the couple, and there's all the UFO memorabilia on the shelves and on the walls, well, 90% of that came from UFO magazine, from our little office in Ilkley. Things like that happened all the time. Graham and I were invited, almost as a double act in the late 2008, in the late 90s, sorry, to like 2001. We used to go all over the place, and it was through various titles that we'll talk about in other podcasts. But we can remind you of, if you remember, the Hard Evidence series, Secret NASA Transmissions, etc., etc. When we launched this sort of stuff, we were invited into many places, and including Mexico. We had a great time in Acapulco with Jaime Maussan, who had put a lot into the conference, Terza Millennia, which was the last big conference of the millennia, if you like. And from Catholic priests down to really crazy people with UFO experiences, trying to sell you bits of an alien craft that had crashed, etc. But these are the sort of places that we went. And it got the message out, and it just went to prove, a lot of these people in Mexico subscribed to UFO magazine. They couldn't speak or read English, but they took it in English because they get somebody to read the stories to them, because what we did was present the UFO material that was available at the time. And it was something special. And I don't think, to do anything other than leave Graham out of this. Graham was instrumental in my public involvement within the subject. I've been involved a long, long time, but from meeting up with Graham to his sat passing, we had some great times. We did some great conferences, met some great people, and let me tell you, we had some great parties as well over the time. But I will always have fond memories. It stays in my mind. I was still in touch with Christine, but Graham was instrumental in, never mind, that you've got your Nick Popes, etc. Graham was the man that the media went to. He had a wonderful speaking voice. He had a wonderful presence on stage. And if you can find on YouTube, etc., any of the old UFO magazine conferences, then have a look and have a listen to the late, great Graham Birdsall, because he was something special. So as we go along with these podcasts, I would like to share some of the interesting, exciting, funny, different things that happened to me along the way. This day and age, with the internet and with the ease of access to information, disinformation, facts and figures, and bluntly, a lot of BS which is published. People can publish absolutely anything they want online, and without structural evidence, without proof of anything. And that's a sad place to be, really, because back in the day, you know, people used to report sightings to local UFO groups, to the local police force, and there have been many cases where the police force have got involved with UFO sightings, and they did have an obligation to forward any suspicious information or information that did look, you know, that it could be that wonderful saying, defence significance. If it's something of danger, if it could be a lost aircraft or something in trouble, they had an obligation to send this information up the chain, if you like, as Nick Pope used to love to say, up the chain of command. Well, for the police force, it will be probably make a note in the desk diary and pass the information on to the RAF. If the RAF thought it was anything suspicious, then perhaps it did go to the MOD or vice versa. And people did look at these things. One case I'd like to share with you, which in today's sense is probably a little bit more mundane than extraterrestrial, but we got a phone call from a couple based in Leeds, going back, I would say probably about 2000, I think it was, and we titled the story in the magazine "The Kirkstall Lights," which for people living in the area is a bit of a pun, really, because the local pub's called the Kirkstall Lights. Older couple, nothing to do with the UFO subject whatsoever. The guy had bought a camcorder, which was fortunate because during this time he managed to get images of what he thought was something unusual. So unusual was this that Leeds has got a busy airport, Leeds and Bradford International Airport, and the incoming flight path on most occasions takes aircraft right across the city centre, about 4.5 miles up the road to Leeds and Bradford Airport's runway, which is in Yeadon. Now, this gentleman had been out in his garden. It was a winter's tea time. It was about 5:15, I think it was, in the evening. And he's out in his garden, and where he lived, he sort of overlooked where Elland Road football stadium is. It was a clear night, and he caught for these two lights in the sky. And he thought, that's strange. He knew what aircraft looked like because aircraft were coming over his house, you know, daily, many times a day and into the evening. So both daytime and nighttime footage, he knew what to expect. And of course, at the altitude they were at, just maybe 2,000-3,000 feet coming into land, you could hear the things. We had a police helicopter presence at the time that was based a few miles out to the south of the city in Tingley. But again, you knew the helicopter, that was noisy, that had some very distinct light formations on it. We knew what it was, he knew what it was. But these two lights just seemed to float across the sky. Now, these were definitely not Chinese lanterns, we know that for a fact. We've seen the video, we've got the video. If I can find it for you on one of the visual podcasts, then I'll share that with you. But it did feature in probably UFOs Hard Evidence 2 or 3, because what developed from this was quite interesting. We got the report, we rung the local newspaper, which was a big publication, the Yorkshire Evening Post, which was the nighttime edition, and the Yorkshire Post, which is the daily publication. It's got a big readership right across Yorkshire and into Lincolnshire. And they confirmed to us that, yeah, they'd had a couple of reports of people seeing these strange lights going over the city. Now we'll call him Ken. Ken managed to film these things for a good 30-40 seconds as they passed over his house. So one, we had the footage, and two, we knew exactly where and when it was filmed. So being a little bit diligent, we rung the local airport, Leeds and Bradford, and just said, look, this is UFO magazine, please don't we're not nut jobs. We've just got this report, and we've actually got some video footage of something coming across the Leeds skies at tea time last Friday, I think it was, when it happened. I said, I wondered if you'd be able to comment on it. And he said, well, we'll have a look. He says, obviously we've got air traffic. He says, but what time was it? And the guy from the airport said, well, that's interesting, because to be honest, there's nothing due in or out of the airport within a 15-minute time slot of what you're saying. And for an aircraft to be where it was at that time to touch down in Leeds Bradford was a matter of 3 minutes. Likewise, if something had taken off and going away from the airport, it was in a time window of 2 or 3 minutes. So he said, leave it with me and I'll get back to you. Well, unbeknown to us, the guy at the airport had gone to, again, we'll say that Nick Pope thing, up his chain of command. And it got to the airport director, who was Andy Rackham. And Andy rung us at the magazine and said, I'm interested in this, he says, because I'd love to see the footage first of all. He says, but the times that you're talking about, he says, my colleague's right. He said, we'd nothing really in the air at that time. He said, I'll tell you what I'd like you to do. Would you like to come up to the airport and we'll sit down and we'll sit down with our radar air traffic manager and we'll have a chat and have a look at the footage and see what we think. Well, this was a great opportunity for us at the magazines, and mob-handed basically we'd said, look, we do make these documentary type programs for the magazine called UFOs Hard Evidence. I wonder, could we be really cheeky? Would you mind if we brought the cameras with us? He says, no, not at all, bring them up, we'll sit down and we'll have a chat. So here was the opportunity to go to a major international airport to talk about UFOs with the guy who actually run the show, the boss. So there, I think there was myself, there was Graham, there was his brother Mark, and Mark's lovely ex-wife Vivian, who sadly passed away a few years ago. But we went up to the airport and we were brought in and sat down in a little conference room with a TV and a video player, and we showed them this footage. And it's nothing overexciting. It's two lights flying across the night sky. No sound at all. You could hear the sound. You could hear Ken's voice, literally asking his wife, what the heck's this I'm looking at? Look at this. This is strange, sort of thing. You could hear the background traffic, but there was no aircraft noise at the time. So moving on, Andy said, well, this is really interesting. He says, I'll tell you what, he says, come with me and I'll take you up to the tower and we'll have a look at the tapes from that day. We knew the date, we knew the time, and here we are, 4 UFO researchers, if you like. Okay, we're in the publishing game. Up we go, up the steps, up to the air traffic control tower at Leeds Bradford Airport. And Andy sat us down with his colleague, who was the manager of the air traffic centre, and we had a spare screen, and he'd got the tapes up from that particular night. And sure enough, he showed us the incoming aircraft at sort of 5 o'clock and at 5:30, and you could see these things coming in and going. And then he went on to explain quite a lot about how the air traffic radar system worked, which opened up to probably about 60 miles from where Yeadon Airport, Leeds Bradford Airport's based, which just about gave you coast-to-coast coverage. Now, you can't see for hundreds of miles, but 60 miles either side of Leeds Bradford went out towards Blackpool in one direction, out towards Scarborough in another direction. And it was interesting to see these areas of military flight that are shown on the screen. So if there's something happening in this area, this is not an area where the normal air traffic flies, but there could be military stuff there. Anyway, he also showed us how they can up and down the gain on, they call it the camera, the actual radar head, and you can literally lift the gain up so far that every tree and every bush around the area comes into view on the screen. Well, that's not very good for people who are monitoring aircraft. So then this gain is turned down and it cuts out the mess and the interference that they need. this stuff's so sensitive, it can pick birds up, flocks of birds up, etc., etc. You don't want to see that. You want to be looking at things that's sort of 20 foot and across. So having explained that to us, he said we couldn't see anything of these objects that Ken had filmed. And sort of Andy explained, look, I'm not over cautious about this because we do filter out the smaller things. He says, but I would like to know if it was something probably in the account of paragliders or something that shouldn't be flying on a night time. These things without radio, without transponders, should not be in the air because they're a danger to other craft. Long and short of it is, we spent the whole day there. They give us absolute fantastic access to the airport facilities. We were taken out in one of the trucks with all the flashing lights on, so we could do some filming at the end of the runway, or both ends of the runway, filming the radar camera itself, etc., in between flights. And what came from that was, it was an unknown. We never really got to the bottom of it, but we struck up a great friendship with the airport, and we proved to them that we're not nut jobs with propellers on our heads or tinfoil hats. We're looking at the subject and trying to get to the bottom of it. And out of the blue, Andy Rackham said, look, he said, I'd love to do a presentation for you at one of your conferences. He says, I've seen these things at Leeds University that you do. Would you like me to come and speak? Well, sure enough, we booked him for the next conference, and Andy gave a good hour's presentation on how air traffic radar works, which was great information for the researchers that's out there saying, look, you can see everything, you know what's going on, you're keeping secrets, etc. And the reception from the audience with a very technical presentation, if you like, was very well received. Now, we put that all together in a 15-20 minute piece for UFOs Hard Evidence, and I believe it's UFOs Hard Evidence 3. If you look on the internet, you'll find it. The front cover page literally shows the airport tower, so you can't miss the episode. But watch it because it's something very different. And that just went to show what sort of contacts UFO magazine had, and how with the right approach that you can actually get to talk to people you probably thought was never possible. And that sticks with me, that one, because as I say, the friendships we made within the air traffic industry was something else, and even down to the fact that when Andy had looked at everything and couldn't find any reference to it on the radar tapes, I took it upon myself to get in touch with RAF Fylingdales, which, if anybody knows the area going out over the Yorkshire Moors towards Whitby, then Fylingdales is the big giant pyramidal shaped building that's isolated there on the moors. And what it is a over the horizon radar system. So basically, it's something from the Cold War years, but used nowadays to track space debris, satellites, anything that's coming into the Earth's atmosphere. So, once again, the over-enthusiastic UFO reporters, they must have pictures of UFOs, they must have had contacts in the time. And Squadron Leader Darling, what a name, a bit of a Blackadder about it, but Squadron Leader Darling was actually a lady squadron leader. And she was quite forthcoming on the phone with me. I said we'd been to Leeds Bradford, they'd looked at their tapes, they couldn't see anything, and we gave them times and dates, and she said, look, I'll run through the log and I'll have a look and I'll see if we saw anything or anything unusual. And a couple of days later, a very polite email come back, and it was nothing like, we don't quote on UFOs or the standard MOD response that you used to get from the area where Nick Pope supposedly worked. But what she said was, look, she says, we've had a look. She says, there's nothing out of the ordinary. She says, the only thing I can think is that it was something quite small. It was something probably not transponding, otherwise the airport would have known about it. She says, but it's an unknown, and she says, and that's as far as we can take it. And I thanked her very much for what she'd done, and popped the story in the magazine, as you do. The one thing about the Kirkstall Lights case, which is a little bit more probably quite appropriate, when we look at some of the stuff that Paul Sinclair's been observing out over the North Sea, out from Bridlington and Bempton Rocks and the Yorkshire Wolds, he's observed, and he's actually caught on camera, these small balls of light that seem to fly unannounced, just appear somewhere and what have you. And there's quite a considerable similarity between what Paul filmed and what Ken filmed going back 20 years ago now. So, you know, people are still active in this subject in a good way, and I trust you're going to look at Paul's podcast as well and read his books, because Paul he's a nuts and bolts man. He gets down to earth, and he's not frightened of asking questions. He'll go out there, he'll find witnesses. You know, he's spoken to people on cases that are 40, 50, 60 years old, and he's got information that was never covered in the day, and brought some wonderful stories and wonderful experiences into the world of ufology, if you like. And some great cases being revamped, re-brought up and reinvestigated. But going back to airports, in 2006, the infamous or famous, whatever you want to call it, Chicago O'Hare International Airport, reports came through that people had seen this UFO over the airport, literally watched it fly off and, as described, punch a hole in the sky or a hole in the clouds, where this thing just vanished. So let's try and compare with what we've just been talking about. This is 2006. This is 5 years after 9/11 in the United States. Anybody who travelled to the States after 2001, after the terrible incidents of 9/11, will know what a pain in the butt US air travel was, because obviously they stepped up security massively, because back in the day, you could walk on with a fridge on your shoulder or a colour TV under your arm, and people really didn't seem to care. The security in the inland flights was absolutely non-existent. But obviously they've stepped that up. Now, we've got, I think the report says something like a dozen airport employees. So these are not pilots, these are not second officers, these are not aircrew. The people that reported this stem from the people on the ground, the baggage handlers, the people who actually work on the apron of the airport. Now, very quickly, it was reported that this disc was seen hovering over the airport. It was there for quite a while and then took off. Now, it was reported over the radios to supervisors that there was something over the airport and should it be taken a look at. Now, let's just go back to this security business. There were cameras everywhere. Cameras all around, watching every plane, watching everybody move, inside, outside. We're talking Chicago, a big US city. There's cameras on 1 million buildings, and everybody up their security because of what had happened at 9/11, and also because CCTV was becoming the norm within city centres and helping people protect their businesses and their property. Not one single clip of film, one photograph, and let's think on 2007, well, most mobile phones had a camera on them, so something could have been photographed. It was daylight, so there was no issue with it. It was too dark to get pictures. It just seemed to happen, did this story, and it ran for a while, and it made all the major newspapers. It went around the world. But again, it was something that had no substance to it. There was nothing. There was no evidence. One or two roughly photoshopped pictures turned up on the internet, and like ever, witnesses keep turning up 10 years, 15 years later on. Oh yes, we saw this, we saw that. Well, at the time, it looks like there was something there, whatever it was, but it didn't cause any reaction. Think on, the air traffic system works where you have airport radar and then in-flight radar. So the airport radar is scanning the apron, it's scanning every single movement across the ground, and then we have the in-flight radar, which is scanning everything when it takes off. Now, there would have been several aircraft coming in and out of O'Hare International during the period of this particular sighting. But again, nothing was seen on radar, nothing was diverted, no flights were cancelled and told not to land or to go round or to go into a holding pattern. So nobody saw anything on radar, no alarm bells were raised, and even after the ground staff had said, look, there's something up here, allegedly, nothing was done to take any reciprocal action to safeguard what would be, a lot of people in a lot of aeroplanes. So I think we can take the whole airport situation as a non-starter, really, and maybe a fabrication. But just look what we did with that little airport in Leeds. As researchers go, we spoke to the witnesses, we saw the evidence, we went to the airport, we got cooperation from the airport, and I don't think that's one-fold. I think if somebody had tackled the O'Hare system in a similar way, then perhaps they may have got more information out of it. Or, a little bit tongue-in-cheek, had somebody read the UFO magazine article in the States and thought, oh, we can do that. Who knows? In closing this first podcast of mine, folks, I'd like to share something with you that has stuck with me from the beginning of the modern era of the UFO era, if you like. Let's go back to Kenneth Arnold. And Kenneth Arnold's sighting over Mount Rainier, where he described, 8 or 9 of these crescent-shaped crafts skipping across the skyline. In the early 80s, Yorkshire Television produced Arthur C. Clarke's Mysterious Worlds. And these were a great set of programmes, actually, produced by Adam Hart Davis, which is somebody you might remember, who was quite an eccentric type of fella who used to do a lot of work on science projects and getting science education out to younger people. So the programmes were very, very good. And as I say, made locally for Yorkshire Television. Well, they got hold of an interview with Kenneth Arnold that was done probably in the late 70s, early 80s. I mean, Kenneth would have been in his mid-70s at the time, and he was interviewed actually in the front seat of an aircraft and looking over his shoulder, talking to the reporter. And what he said was, look, what I saw were these crescent-shaped things flying. He said, they were skipping across the sky, and when we got to the ground, I told the reporters who were waiting for me this. He says, and as you know, I described them as like a panplate would if you threw it across the water, and it skipped like a saucer being thrown over the water. He says, and they captured the word flying saucer, and people have been seeing them ever since. I'll leave you with that. Thank you. See you next time. See you next time. See you next time.